So let's go ahead and start building our simple calculator using fragments. And I'm going to create a new project. And I'm going to call this Fragmented Ohm's Law. And let me get rid of the apostrophe there. And we'll use API level 10 and up. And I'm going to start with a blank activity, 101 blank activity. And we'll take the default this time. So we're going to have just one main activity with two fragments, an input fragment and an output fragment. Okay, so Gradle's done now. First thing we're going to do is in this layout activity under main.xml, we're going to change this relative layout to a frame layout. And you can actually insert fragments into many different kinds of layouts, but frame layouts are good because frame layouts have exactly one thing inside of them, and we're going to treat our fragment as exactly one thing and insert it into the frame. And then I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this text view because we don't really need it here. And then I'm not going to put anything inside of this tag, so I'm going to make it a singleton tag, like so. And that's really all we need for the layout for our main activity. So it's basically just a box that we can put things into. Now let's go ahead and add some fragments. So I'm going to right click on App and say New, Fragment, Fragment blank. And I'm going to have an input fragment. And I do want to create the layout XML, but I don't want this fragment factory or interface callbacks. So this is just going to make my fragment as simple as possible so that I understand what's going on with it. And click Finish. And then while Gradle is doing its thing, I'm going to go ahead and right click on App and say New, whoops, try it again, right click on App, New, Fragment, Fragment blank, and this one's going to be Output Fragment. And once again, I'm not going to include factory methods or interface callbacks. And then I'll let Gradle cook through this. Okay, so that was actually pretty fast. Now, the input fragment is going to be where I have my input form, and the output fragment is where I'm going to display the amps and the watts. So I'm going to go ahead and open my layout. So here's the layout for my activity window, which is just a box to put things into. And then here's the layout for my input fragment, which I'm going to have the input form. And here's the fragment for here's the layout for the output fragment where I'm going to have my display form. So let's go to fragment input. And what I want to do here is grab activity input. So here's the layout that I was using for my input form. And I'm going to go ahead and put that, squish this down a little bit, and I'm going to just go ahead and put that in my fragment input. So select all, paste, and then I'm going to do the same thing for activity output. I'm going to select all and copy, and then I'm going to go to fragment output, select all, and paste. So for this to work, I have to import these strings and dimensions, and that's about it. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to open values, strings.xml, and then I'm going to go to my old project, strings.xml. And I'm just going to copy all of these strings here and paste them in here. And I'll change the app name to Fragmented Ohm's Law Calculator. And I don't actually need this hello world here, so let me go ahead and get rid of that. And then for dimens, under dimens.xml, I added this layout space. So let me go ahead and add it here as well. And that should be all of the references. So now this layout is fine, and this layout is fine. And if I go ahead and run the app now, I'm just going to go ahead and hit the run button, and we'll run it on the device. Okay, so here's my fragmented Ohm's law calculator, and it's not showing anything at all. And the reason is because I have a frame on this layout, but I haven't actually added anything to it yet. So the first thing we want to do is we want to start with the input fragment displayed in this frame. And we're going to do that in Java code. So let me show you how that works. So I'm going to go to MainActivity, and in the onCreate method, when this thing first gets set up, here's where the view for the activity gets set to be that frame. First thing we're going to do is plug in the input activity. So the way this is going to work is we're going to use something called the FragmentManager. FragmentManager. And be careful that you select this android.support.v4.app. This is the compatibility one that we're going to be using. Don't select android.app. So go ahead and select that, and then FragmentManager. So a variable named FragmentManager of type FragmentManager, and this is going to be equal to get support FragmentManager. So this is the support version of the FragmentManager that's backwards compatible with earlier APIs. And then what we're going to want to do is use a transaction for the FragmentManager. So the FragmentManager manages fragments. We're going to create a transaction for the FragmentManager. And then the transaction is going to be what actually adds our fragment to the layout. So FragmentTransaction, and once again, make sure you get the support.v4.app version here. Call that transaction is equal to FragmentManager dot begin transaction. So now what we're going to do is we're going to add some instructions to this transaction, and then we're going to commit those changes. So it's a lot like when we were dealing with shared preferences in a shared preference editor. So we'll go ahead and say transaction dot replace. So I'm going to replace the contents of a frame in my layout with a fragment. So going back to my activity main, this is the frame that I want to replace the contents of. And I have to have some way of referring to that in my Java code. And whenever that happens, you need to add an ID to the thing in your layout. So I'm going to add an ID, and I'm going to call this content. So here's my content frame, and I'm going to refer to that here, r.id.content, and then I have to give it the fragment that I want to add to that frame. So this input fragment, basically I want to create a new one of these, and that's what I want to pass into the replace. So we'll go input fragment, input is equal to new input fragment. So I'm creating a new input fragment, and then I'm replacing the contents of the content frame with that fragment. Then to make that actually happen, I'm going to commit the change, and that's what's going to cause my input form to appear in my main activity. So let's go ahead and try that. Whoops. There it is. So let's try running that again, because we had the old one there too. And there it is. So I have my input form showing in my frame. Now, when I've added the fragment to my layout, that means that I can now access these edit texts and this button the same way as I could before when this was part of the static layout. Whatever's been added to the layout is now just like a static element in the layout. So I can fetch this, I can set this, I can do all the other stuff that I could do before. And when I click on this calculate button, it's going to call the same calculate method that it used to before in my main activity. I don't have one defined yet, so I'm going to get a crash. So calculate, I get a crash because I haven't defined the calculate method yet.